flames roared against the midnight sky, devouring the heart of Thunder Cove, Mia's diner. Once a sanctuary for laughter and comfort, was now a crackling inferno. Townsfolk stood frozen, their gasps lost in the roar of destruction. Among them was Alice Kim, her sharp eyes scanning the chaos, her mind calculating the next move. This wasn't just about a building, it was a challenge. A threat to their home. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Who could have done this? And why? But Alice, a woman of quiet strength, knew one thing: this was no accident. As the flames reflected in her steely gaze, she silently vowed, whoever dared to strike at the heart of her family would soon regret it. Leave a comment and let us know where you're tuning in from. If you enjoy stories like this, hit subscribe so you don't miss our next inspiring journey tomorrow. Flames clawed at the night sky, their orange and yellow tongues devouring the small coastal diner that had been a cornerstone of Thunder Cove for generations. The acrid stench of smoke filled the air as townsfolk gathered helplessly, murmuring in shock and despair. Amid the chaos, the wail of distant sirens grew louder. But for many, the damage was already done. The beloved diner, Mia's diner, was burning. Alice Kim moved with purpose through the gathering crowd, her coat flapping in the sea breeze. At 90, she walked with a deliberate pace, her movements steady despite the urgency of the scene. Her sharp eyes scanned the chaos, assessing the situation with a practiced calm that seemed at odds with the inferno before her. "Get those hoses over here," she barked at two young men fumbling with a garden hose nearby. They hesitated but obeyed, recognizing the authority in her voice. Alice turned to another group. "Form a line. Buckets from the well. Go!" Townsfolk who moments earlier had been frozen in shock began to move, galvanized by Alice's commanding presence. She positioned herself near the fire's edge, directing the makeshift brigade with precision. It wasn't the first time she'd been in a crisis. Mia, her granddaughter, stood nearby, her face streaked with soot and tears. "It's gone," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Everything's gone, Grandma." Alice's gaze softened as she looked at the young woman. Mia was barely 30. Yet she carried the weight of the diner and its history on her slim shoulders. The diner wasn't just a business, it was the heart of the town. A gathering place for fishermen, tourists, and families. For Mia, it was her inheritance, a link to her late parents, and a symbol of her perseverance. "It's not gone," Alice said firmly, gripping Mia's shoulder. "We'll fix this." The fire department arrived moments later, their hoses dousing the flames. The crowd slowly began to disperse, but the damage was undeniable. The walls of the diner, once painted a cheerful blue, were now blackened and crumbling. Smoke rose in eerie wisps from the ruins, a somber reminder of what had been lost. As the firefighters packed up, whispers rippled through the remaining crowd. "You think it was Rex and his lot?" someone muttered. "Who else would do something like this?" another replied. "They've been after Mia for weeks, trying to buy the place." Alice's expression hardened. She'd heard the rumors about Rex, the leader of a local gang that had been stirring trouble in the area. Their interest in the diner's land wasn't a secret. It sat on a prime location overlooking the ocean, a tempting prize for anyone with the means, or the malice, to take it. "Rex won't stop until he gets what he wants," someone said grimly. "And he'll do worse than this." Alice didn't respond, but her jaw tightened. She had faced men like Rex before, men who relied on fear and intimidation to get their way. She had seen their kind during her time in the Marine Corps. Though back then, the stakes had been far higher than a diner. When the last of the onlookers had gone and the firefighters had cleared the scene, Alice and Mia stood in the stillness of the aftermath. The smell of charred wood lingered, mingling with the salty breeze. Mia's hands trembled as she picked up a scorched photo frame from the debris. It was a picture of her parents, smiling proudly in front of the diner on its opening day. "I can't do this, Grandma," Mia said, her voice breaking. "They're too powerful. They'll just come back." Alice took the frame from her, brushing ash from the glass. She studied the photo for a moment before handing it back. "Mia, listen to me," she said, her tone firm but gentle. "That diner isn't just a building. It's a part of this town. A part of our family. We've fought for it before, and we'll fight for it again." Mia looked at her grandmother, seeing something in her eyes she hadn't noticed before. Beneath the wrinkles and the calm demeanor was a resolve as unyielding as steel. "I've dealt with men like Rex before," Alice continued. "They think they're strong because they can scare people. But real strength? Real strength comes from standing up, even when it's hard." Mia nodded slowly, her tears drying. "What do we do?" she asked. Alice's lips curved into a thin smile. "We start by cleaning this up, and then we make some calls." For the first time that night, Mia felt a flicker of hope. It was faint, like a single ember in the ashes, but it was there. She knew her grandmother wasn't just offering comfort, she was making a promise. As they turned to leave, Alice glanced once more at the smoldering ruins of the diner. Her mind was already working, mapping out what needed to be done. She'd faced worse than this before, and she wasn't about to let a gang of bullies destroy what her family had built. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel, it means so much to us. Now, let's get back to the story. The next morning, the faint smell of smoke still lingered over Thunder Cove. The diner's blackened remains stood as a grim reminder of the previous night's destruction. But Alice Kim was already at work. She wasn't one to dwell on devastation, she believed in action. As the sun broke through the clouds, Alice's mind was racing with plans to rebuild, not just the diner, but the community's confidence. Alice sat across from Mia in the kitchen of their modest home. A legal pad spread out in front of her. The younger woman's face was pale and drawn, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "We need to get the diner running again, even if it's temporary," Alice began, her voice steady. "People need a place to gather. We'll start small. Maybe set up a makeshift space at the town hall. We'll get the coffee brewing. Serve some sandwiches. Keep it alive." Mia blinked at her grandmother, her brow furrowing. "At the town hall? Do you think people will come?" Alice's lips curved into a faint smile. "They'll come because it's more than a diner to them. It's a piece of this town's soul. And we're not letting Rex take that away." Mia nodded, though uncertainty still lingered in her eyes. She hadn't seen this side of her grandmother in years. The focused determination that could cut through any obstacle. By mid-morning, Alice had already made her first round of calls. The town's mayor approved the use of the town hall, a modest space with folding chairs and a kitchen. Alice's next move was to rally more support. She started by visiting Mary, the owner of the local grocery store. "I'll need some supplies," Alice said, stepping into the store and brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. "Bread, eggs, coffee, whatever you can spare to help get this going." Mary leaned on the counter, nodding slowly. "Of course, Alice. You're doing the right thing. That diner means a lot to all of us. I'll put together a box of essentials." The next stop was at the firehouse, where Alice spoke with a few of the younger volunteers who had helped extinguish the blaze. She explained her plan, enlisting their help to move tables and chairs from storage to the town hall. Their enthusiasm was infectious. And for the first time since the fire, Alice felt a glimmer of optimism. Later that afternoon, Alice made a more personal call. She sat at her desk, staring at the phone for a moment before dialing a number she hadn't used in years. The line crackled, and a familiar gruff voice answered. "Kim, is that you?" "It is, Jack," Alice replied, her tone softer than usual. "I need your help." Colonel Jack Morrison, a fellow Marine who had served alongside Alice during the Korean War, listened intently as she explained the situation. When she finished, there was a brief pause. "You can count on me," Jack said, "and I'll bring a few others. We'll be there by the weekend." By the time Alice hung up, she felt a weight lift. Jack's word was as good as gold, and she knew his presence would make a world of difference. The temporary diner setup came together over the next 2 days. Tables and chairs were arranged in neat rows, and a hand-painted sign reading Mia's Diner was hung outside the town hall. The first morning, a trickle of customers came in, mostly regulars who couldn't bear to go without their daily coffee and pancakes. By the end of the week, the place was bustling. Mia, though still shaken, worked tirelessly alongside her grandmother. The two of them poured coffee, grilled sandwiches, and greeted each customer with a smile. It wasn't the same as the original diner, but it was a start. Rex and his gang were not idle during this time. They had heard about the temporary diner setup, and it didn't sit well with them. Late one night, long after the last customers had left, two of Rex's men crept up to the town hall, armed with spray paint and a hammer. They vandalized the building, smashing windows and scrawling threatening messages on the walls. When Alice and Mia arrived the next morning, they were greeted by the sight of broken glass and words like "leave or else" sprayed in bright red across the front door. Mia's shoulders sagged, but Alice's eyes narrowed. "They want us scared," Alice said, her voice cold. "But they've underestimated us." Word spread quickly through the town, and by noon, a small crowd had gathered at the town hall. Among them were several of Alice's old Marine comrades, freshly arrived and ready to help. Jack Morrison stood at the forefront, his broad frame and weathered face radiating quiet strength. "We're not letting them win," Jack said, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "Alice has a plan, and we're going to see it through." The sight of the veterans standing shoulder to shoulder with the townspeople reignited a sense of hope. Together, they began repairing the damage, replacing the windows and repainting the walls. The temporary diner reopened the next day, brighter and more resilient than ever. The vandalism was a clear escalation, and everyone knew Rex wouldn't stop there. But Alice wasn't backing down. As she stood outside the town hall that evening, watching the last rays of sun as the dust settled on the latest vandalism, Alice Kim knew it was time to take control of the situation. She had spent a lifetime mastering the art of planning under pressure, and this moment called for the same discipline and resolve. Seated around a folding table in the makeshift diner at the town hall, Alice and her small team of allies began to outline their strategy. Jack Morrison, her old Marine comrade, leaned forward, his sharp eyes scanning the group. "We need to do more than just react. If Rex and his gang think they can intimidate us, we'll show them they're wrong." Alice nodded. "The key is strategy," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We don't have the numbers to confront them head-on, but we have something better: experience, discipline, and the will to fight for what's right." The room's energy shifted as Alice laid out the first part of her plan, securing the temporary diner's operations and creating a protective network around Mia. Jack and the other veterans agreed to take shifts patrolling the area, keeping an eye out for any suspicious activity. They also began training a few younger townspeople in basic defensive tactics, instilling confidence in the community. "This isn't just about the diner," Alice said. "It's about showing them that we're united. And we won't be bullied." With the immediate security measures in place, Alice turned her attention to the bigger picture. She needed leverage against Rex, something that could dismantle his hold over the town. That's when she thought of Earl Whitaker, a retired investigative journalist who had spent decades uncovering corruption in larger cities before retiring to Thunder Cove. Alice visited Earl at his modest home on the outskirts of town, where the aging journalist greeted her with a skeptical look. "Alice Kim," he said, his voice gravelly. "Haven't seen you in years. What brings you here?" She explained the situation in detail, laying out Rex's actions and their growing threat to the community. Earl listened intently, nodding occasionally but keeping his thoughts to himself. "I need your help," Alice concluded. "If we can uncover proof of what Rex is really after, we can turn the tide. The town needs to know the truth." Earl leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "It's a dangerous game you're playing, Alice. But I've never been one to shy away from a fight for justice." Within days, Earl began piecing together the threads of Rex's operation. He reached out to old contacts and scoured public records, uncovering property transactions and shell companies linked to Rex's gang. The evidence painted a clear picture. Rex wasn't just after the diner, he had a broader plan to acquire multiple properties along the waterfront, turning them into a lucrative enterprise for himself and his associates. Earl's findings added fuel to Alice's determination. She gathered her core team, Jack, Earl, and a few trusted locals, to discuss the next steps. "We'll use the diner as bait," Alice said, tapping a finger on the map of the town hall setup spread out before them. "Rex is desperate to shut us down, and that desperation will make him sloppy." Jack frowned slightly. "It's risky," he said. "If we're not careful, we could be walking right into their hands." Alice nodded. "That's why we'll be ready. We'll control the environment. Make sure we're the ones dictating the terms." The plan was meticulous. Alice and her team would stage a public fundraiser at the temporary diner, inviting townspeople to come together and show their support for rebuilding. The event would be heavily publicized, ensuring Rex and his gang couldn't ignore it. Meanwhile, Jack and the veterans would position themselves strategically around the area, ready to intervene if things went south. Earl would play a crucial role in the operation. He planned to confront Rex directly, posing as a concerned citizen willing to negotiate. With a hidden recording device, Earl aimed to capture Rex admitting his scheme, providing irrefutable evidence to present to the authorities. The night of the fundraiser arrived, and the town hall buzzed with activity. Strings of lights hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over the space. Tables were laden with baked goods, coffee, and steaming bowls of chowder. Mia, dressed in an apron emblazoned with the diner's logo, moved from table to table, thanking people for their support. Alice watched from the corner, her sharp eyes scanning the room. Jack stood nearby, arms crossed, his presence a silent deterrent to anyone considering trouble. Outside, other veterans patrolled the perimeter, their movements precise and unobtrusive. As the evening progressed, Earl slipped away to meet with Rex at a predetermined location just outside town. The confrontation was tense but calculated. Rex, overconfident and dismissive, let slip enough details about his plans to incriminate himself. Earl's hidden recorder captured every word. Back at the town hall, the atmosphere remained festive, though Alice never let her guard down. When Earl returned, a triumphant glint in his eye, she knew they had what they needed. The fundraiser concluded without incident, but the real victory lay in the evidence Earl had gathered. Alice called an emergency meeting with the town's leaders, presenting them with the recordings and documents. The proof was undeniable, and the community rallied behind her efforts to bring Rex and his gang to justice. This isn't just about stopping Rex, Alice told the group. It's about sending a message: we won't be bullied, and we won't let greed destroy what we've built. As the meeting adjourned, Alice allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. The trap had been set, and Rex's downfall was now only a matter of time. The night air in Thunder Cove carried a tension so thick it felt electric. The temporary diner at the town hall glowed warmly under strings of lights, casting flickering shadows on the crowd gathered for what seemed like an innocent community event. But Alice Kim knew better. Tonight wasn't just about raising spirits or funds, it was the final act in a battle for their town. Positioned discreetly around the building, Alice's veteran team kept a watchful eye. Jack Morrison stood near the entrance, his bulk and quiet authority a clear signal to anyone considering trouble. Other veterans, spread out in pairs, monitored the edges of the event, communicating with subtle nods and hand signals. The townsfolk, unaware of the underlying danger, laughed and chatted, filling the space with an air of cautious optimism. Alice's eyes never stopped moving. From her seat near the back, she scanned every face, every shadow, looking for the slightest sign of trouble. When Earl Whitaker slid into the seat next to her, his expression grim, she knew the moment was near. Rex took the bait, Earl murmured, passing her a small recorder. He's on his way. Sounds like he's bringing reinforcements. Alice nodded, her mouth a thin line. She leaned toward Jack and relayed the update. Stay sharp. It's going to happen soon. The first sign of the gang's arrival was the low rumble of motorcycles in the distance. The sound grew louder, a menacing growl that silenced the chatter and drew uneasy glances from the crowd. Mia froze mid-sentence, gripping a tray of coffee cups. Alice placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. Stay calm, she said, her voice firm. We've got this. The motorcycles came to a halt in a semicircle at the edge of the event, their headlights cutting harsh beams through the festive glow. Rex dismounted first, his leather jacket and sneering expression making him every bit the caricature of menace. Behind him, a dozen gang members followed, their postures radiating arrogance. Well, isn't this a cozy little gathering? Rex drawled, his voice loud enough to carry over the stunned silence. Shame if something were to happen to it. Jack stepped forward, his arms crossed. You've made your point, Rex. Now it's time for you to leave. Rex's grin widened. Leave? Oh. No. We're just getting started. You see, this town, he gestured grandly. This town belongs to me. Alice stood, drawing the gang's attention. The only thing you own, Rex, is a pile of bad decisions, she said evenly. Her words carried an edge of steel, cutting through his bravado. And tonight, you're going to learn that this town doesn't bow to bullies. Rex's smirk faltered. He glanced at his men, then back at Alice. You think a handful of old-timers can stop us? We'll see, Alice replied, her tone calm. At that moment, Jack gave a sharp whistle. The veterans moved with practiced precision, stepping out of the shadows to form a perimeter around the gang. Their quiet confidence was unnerving, a stark contrast to the gang's bravado. Each veteran carried a makeshift weapon, a crowbar here, A wooden baton there, but it was their presence that spoke volumes. "You brought a dozen men," Jack said, his voice steady. "We brought a lifetime of experience. Do you really want to test that?" Rex hesitated, his bravado cracking. He turned to bark orders at his men. But they were already faltering. The veterans had closed the distance. Their movements coordinated and deliberate. The gang members shuffled nervously, their earlier confidence evaporating under the weight of the veterans' unflinching stares. Alice used the moment to step forward, holding up the recorder Earl had given her. "You've already lost, Rex. We have proof of your land grab scheme. The police are on their way. And this ends tonight." Rex's eyes darted around, searching for an escape. But there was none. "You think this little show of yours scares me?" he spat, though his voice lacked conviction. "No," Alice said. "But it should." As if on cue, the distant wail of sirens pierced the night. The gang's cohesion crumbled completely. Some tried to mount their bikes, only to find their paths blocked by the veterans. Others raised their hands, their earlier bravado replaced with panic. When the police cars arrived, officers quickly moved to secure the scene. Alice handed over the recorder, her expression unreadable as she watched Rex being handcuffed. "You think this changes anything?" Rex shouted, struggling against the officers. "You can't stop what's coming." Alice stepped closer, her gaze steady. "You already lost, Rex. Now it's time to face the consequences." As the gang members were loaded into police cars, the tension in the air began to dissolve. The townsfolk, who had watched the confrontation unfold with bated breath, broke into quiet applause. Mia rushed to Alice, wrapping her in a tight embrace. "We did it," Mia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "No," Alice corrected gently. "We all did it. Together." Jack clapped Alice on the shoulder, a rare smile breaking across his face. "You've still got it, Kim." Alice allowed herself a small smile. "So do you, Jack. So do you." As the crowd began to disperse, the lights of the town hall flickered gently, a beacon of resilience against the darkness. For Alice, the fight wasn't just about protecting the diner or the town. It was about proving that strength wasn't measured by brute force but by unity, courage, and the willingness to stand up for what was right. The smell of fresh paint and sawdust filled the air as Thunder Cove came alive with activity. The ruins of Mia's diner, once a symbol of loss and devastation, were now a construction site bustling with volunteers. Hammers pounded, saws whirred, and laughter rippled through the group as neighbors came together to rebuild what had been taken. Alice Kim stood to the side, her sharp eyes scanning the progress. She'd seen a lot in her 90 years. But this moment, watching the community work together with renewed purpose, was one of the most gratifying. Even the younger residents, who'd seemed more absorbed in their own lives, had stepped up, driven by a sense of pride and connection that hadn't been felt in years. Mia approached, carrying a tray of iced tea. Her face, though still marked by the stress of recent events, held a new light. "Tea break," she offered, handing a glass to Alice. Alice took the glass, her weathered hands steady as ever. "They're doing good work," she said, nodding toward a group of teenagers painting the newly erected walls a cheerful shade of blue. Mia followed her gaze, a small smile tugging at her lips. "It's hard to believe this is actually happening. A few weeks ago, I thought we'd lost everything." Alice turned to her granddaughter, her expression softening. "You didn't lose everything, Mia. You still had this town, these people, and they had you. That's what matters." Mia hesitated, then asked the question that had been lingering in her mind. Grandma, where did you learn to do all this? The planning, the leadership, everything? Alice's lips twitched into a faint smile. She set her glass down and motioned for Mia to sit with her on a nearby bench. It's time you knew a little more about your old grandma, she said. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Alice shared stories from her days in the Marine Corps. She spoke of the Korean War, of her role as a logistics officer ensuring that troops had what they needed to survive. She told Mia about the friendships forged under fire, the moments of triumph, and the times she had to make impossible decisions. Through it all, her voice remained steady, her words honest and unembellished. You see, Alice concluded, leadership isn't about being the loudest or the strongest. It's about showing people what they can do together, even when they're scared or unsure. It's about serving something bigger than yourself. Mia's eyes glistened as she listened. She'd always known her grandmother was remarkable, but hearing these stories made her realize just how deep Alice's strength ran. You've done so much, she said quietly. And now you've done it again. For us. Alice reached out and squeezed Mia's hand. And you'll do it for others, too. That's how it works. Mia, you carry it forward. By the time the diner reopened, it had become more than just a building. It was a testament to the resilience and unity of Thunder Cove. The entire town turned out for the grand reopening, filling the newly built space with laughter, conversation, and the familiar smell of coffee and pancakes. The walls were adorned with photos of the town's history, including a new addition, a framed picture of Alice in her Marine uniform. Standing tall and proud, Mia stood behind the counter, her eyes sweeping the crowd. She'd never felt so connected to the people she served or to her own family's legacy. And when she glanced at Alice, sitting at a corner table with Jack Morrison and a few other veterans, she felt a swell of gratitude and determination. As the evening wore on, Alice watched the scene with quiet satisfaction. The battle against Rex and his gang had been hard fought, but it had also rekindled something in the town, a sense of purpose, of togetherness, that had been missing for far too long. And while the fight had taken its toll, it had also reminded her of the enduring value of service and leadership. When Jack leaned over and raised his coffee cup in a silent toast, Alice smiled and returned the gesture. This was what they'd fought for, not just a building, but a community's heart. As the crowd began to thin and the lights dimmed, Mia approached Alice with a plate of pie. On the house, she said with a grin. Alice chuckled. Don't let that become a habit, she replied, though her eyes sparkled with affection. Taking a bite, she savored the moment, knowing that the diner and the town was in good hands. The night ended with laughter and stories, the kind that would be told and retold for years. And as Alice stepped outside, the cool night air wrapping around her, she looked up at the stars and felt a quiet peace. The fight was over, but the legacy she'd helped rebuild would carry on, brighter and stronger than ever.
With the diner rebuilt and the town united, Alice proved that courage and leadership can conquer any challenge. What would you have done in her shoes? Share your thoughts and this story with others. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.